Thank you for coming. I'll come straight to the point. I killed my husband.
Yes, madam.
I suppose I put it a bit bluntly, but I could never go into hysterics over anything. I've hated him for a long time, and yesterday I shot him.
Anne, you know Lawrence has already confessed to it.
Of course I know. He loves me. It was impossibly good of him.
How did he know you'd done it, madam?
I told him, of course.
What did you shoot your husband with?
With his own gun. He used to keep it in the dressing room wardrobe.
What type was it?
I don't know. It was some kind of war souvenir. Italian, I suppose. You push the bullets in from the bottom of the handle.
If I was to tell you, madam, that we've already proved to our satisfaction that Mr. Redding could not possibly have committed this crime, would you still persist in this rather dubious account of your activities? Oh, while I remember it, like...
Oh, Sergeant, Inspector, what a nice surprise.
Madam.
I wonder if I might impose upon you for a small contribution to our church restoration fund. A halfpenny or two would do. Such a vigorous appeal in the early days. But to tell you the truth, I don't think Mr. Hawes, the new curate, has helped. A little too spiritual, if you know what I mean, for a curate. Yes. Oh, thank you. Perhaps that's it, yes. Thank you, very generous. Now then, have you persuaded Mrs. Prothero and Mr. Redding that they couldn't possibly have murdered the Colonel? I think it's about time they started to tell everyone the truth, don't you? Well, I presume that's why you're here.
Miss Marple.
Did you know that Mrs. Lestrange visited the Colonel on the afternoon before the murder? Dr. Haydock drove her up. Now, I find that very interesting, don't you?
I think it would be a good idea, Miss Marple, if I dropped round later and had the whole story from you.
Oh, sure you're far too busy to listen to my little ideas, Inspector.
No one can accuse me of not being thorough.
Indeed.
I suppose it's having an ear for gossip and a talent for a bit of blind guesswork, really.
What is, Inspector?
Stops your little ideas being a waste of time.
Well, I don't think I've ever been complimented quite like that in my life before, Inspector.
Don't mention it.
Now, would you like a flag?
Thank you.
The elderberry is a little more, shall we say, forthright, Inspector, but I'm sure that will suit your character. Oh, now let me see. Where was I?
In the garden, madam, attending to your Botanica grandiflora.
Oh, yes, yes. You understand that I can see the comings and goings at the vicarage front door from my little vantage point, but I only see, as it were, the official visits.
Understood, Miss Marple.
We'll see it through. I'll help you. I will. We're leaving.
Mrs. Prothero was first to arrive at 6:15, but that is approximate, you understand. She was coming down Back Lane from the square.
Good evening, Miss Marple.
Oh, good evening, Mrs. Prothero. On her way to meet the Colonel at the vicarage, I understand. Well, perhaps it was that, anyway. You know what dresses are these days. Nothing could have been hidden under it, you know. Certainly not a gun. She went round the side of the vicarage towards the study, presumably to see if the Colonel was there yet. And I suppose he wasn't, because she came back almost immediately and went into the old summer house Mr. Redding uses as a studio.
Excuse me, madam. We've been taking some statements.
Yes, Sergeant.
Thank you, madam. You didn't hear a shot, did you, by any chance?
No, not then, but about 10 minutes later. It seemed to come from the woods, but it didn't sound like the shooting one hears in the woods. But of course it might not if it were echoing back from the woods and wasn't a shotgun in the first place. But it sounded odd. Yes, Sergeant?
Well, that ties in with our other statement. Definite shot, sounded odd, about 6:30.
The next person to turn up, before the shot, you realise, was Mr. Redding. I nearly missed him, as a matter of fact, as I was dealing just then with a very nasty brute of a dandelion. He came along from the village just about 5 minutes after Mrs. Prothero. And
Yes, that's right, from the pub, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry, madam.
That's quite all right, Sergeant. Mr. Redding went straight to the studio. And then I heard the shot about 10 minutes later, as I said. And then, shortly after that, he and Mrs. Prothero left the studio together, going towards the square. Later, Mr. Redding returned and went round to the front of the vicarage at about 10 to 7. So you see, whoever it was didn't enter the vicarage by any sides visible to me.
Thank you, Miss Marple. You make a decent witness, I'll give you that. Problem is, if Redding and Mrs. Prothero are in the clear, there's no one else with a real motive.
Oh. Oh, well, I was...
What?
Well, I was just thinking of how many other people might want the Colonel out of the way. Oh, I don't say they'd murder him to get him out of the way, but I was... Oh, dear me, yes. I'd forgotten him. I make it 5, possibly 6.